Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that will literally save your life. If you ever find yourself trapped in the most dangerous city in human history, stop scrolling if you've ever wondered how brutal ancient Rome really was. Because what I'm about to show you will shatter every Hollywood myth you've ever believed. You have exactly 47 minutes to learn the survival techniques that kept people alive during Rome's deadliest hours. And I need your help deciding which of these 3 fatal mistakes killed the most visitors. Here's a secret historians don't want you to know. While you're picturing gladiators and marble columns, the real ancient Rome after sunset was a nightmare that makes modern war zones look peaceful. Did you know that Roman soldiers, the same warriors who conquered half the world, refused to patrol their own streets after dark? This one fact will blow your mind. More people died from a single night in Rome than from entire gladiator tournaments. If you want to survive the next 15 minutes, listen up. Because I'm about to reveal the 3 mistakes that turned tourists into corpses. And you won't believe what the number 1 killer actually was. Hear me out. Everything you think you know about Roman civilization is based on daytime propaganda. The Romans you've heard about. They locked themselves behind iron doors the moment the sun set. This tip will blow your mind. The greatest danger wasn't from barbarians, wild animals, or even gladiators. I just found out that 73% of nighttime deaths in Rome came from something so unexpected. It's going to change how you see this entire civilization. Are you one of those people who think ancient cities were safer than modern ones? Watch this if you struggle with understanding why Rome fell. Because tonight you'll experience the chaos that destroyed an empire from within. But wait, there's more. And this is where it gets really terrifying. I can't believe this is actually true. But Roman mothers used to tell their children that if they heard footsteps after midnight, they should hide under their beds and pray to the gods until sunrise. Why would they do this? Because even the bravest centurions knew that Rome's streets belonged to something far worse than barbarian invaders once darkness fell. Here's what nobody tells you about ancient Rome. The same civilization that built roads spanning continents couldn't figure out basic street lighting. This mistake alone killed more visitors than plagues, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions combined. Think about this for a second. You're about to navigate a city of 1 million people in complete darkness, where every shadow could hide a knife and every alleyway could be your tomb. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from as we travel back together to this terrifying night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. PSA: what I'm about to show you contains survival techniques that could save your life in any dangerous city. The moment your sandaled feet touch the cobblestones outside Rome's walls, you realize you've made a catastrophic error, that this mistake could destroy your chances of survival in 5 seconds. The sun is setting with alarming speed, painting the massive walls in shades of blood that feel more like an omen than a sunset. You need to watch this if you struggle with understanding why even hardened Roman veterans called nighttime Rome the mouth of hell. I can't believe this is true, but the same city that built aqueducts spanning continents became a death trap the moment torches were lit. Take control of your survival instincts, because what happens next will determine whether you see another sunrise. The first thing that hits you isn't the sight, it's the smell. Even from outside the city proper, the aroma of human waste, rotting food, and burning oil creates a cocktail that would make modern sewage treatment plants seem like perfume factories. Here's a quirky fact that will blow your mind. Romans used crocodile dung as sunscreen during the day, but at night, they rubbed themselves with wolf fat, believing it would make them invisible to criminals. Historians still argue whether the lack of street lighting was negligence or a deliberate tactic to keep the population terrorized into submission. Imagine if the most advanced civilization in history transformed into a post-apocalyptic nightmare every single night. Now you can understand why Roman mothers told their children bedtime stories about surviving until dawn, not about heroes and conquests. The guards at the gate aren't checking who's coming in. They're watching who's trying to get out. And why is this detail so important though? Because it's your first clue that Rome after dark operates by rules that would make modern criminals seem like choir boys. Here's how to recognize the signs that you're about to enter the most dangerous 12 hours in human civilization. Your stomach growls, reminding you that you haven't eaten since morning, but the food vendors are packing up their stalls with suspicious urgency. One elderly merchant catches your confused expression and shakes his head with what might be pity. "First time?" he asks in broken Latin. When you nod, he mutters something that sounds like a prayer and hurries away faster than you'd expect from someone his age. By the end of this video, you'll understand why even the bravest gladiators avoided the streets after sunset, and how you can use their survival secrets to navigate the chaos that's about to unfold. The temperature drops faster than you expected, and you pull your cloak tighter as the first lesson of Roman night survival becomes crystal clear. Everything you thought you knew about this civilization was based on daytime observations, and what emerges in the darkness will challenge every assumption you've ever had about the ancient world. The cobblestones beneath your feet are slick with something you don't want to identify as you take your first steps into Rome's labyrinthine streets. The moment you cross the threshold, you realize that Roman city planning was designed by someone who apparently hated pedestrians. The streets twist and turn without any logical pattern, creating a maze that would challenge even modern GPS systems, except you're navigating it by flickering torchlight and pure desperation. Romans actually built their streets this way on purpose. The winding, narrow passages weren't a design flaw, they were a feature meant to confuse invading armies. Unfortunately, they also confuse everyone else, including you. Even lifelong Roman citizens regularly got lost in their own neighborhoods after dark. The same streets that seemed perfectly navigable during the day transformed into a nightmare maze once the sun disappeared. Your first challenge hits immediately. Which direction do you go? The main thoroughfares are obvious enough. They're the ones with the most screaming. The wider streets, while offering better visibility, also attract the largest crowds of drunks, criminals, and general troublemakers. In ancient Rome, the safest path is often the most terrifying one. The narrow, pitch-black alleyways where at least you can only be attacked from 2 directions instead of 4. Roman architects deliberately built their apartment blocks to lean inward, creating what historians call artificial canyons. This maximized living space, but it also meant that the streets became darker and more claustrophobic as you walked deeper into the city. The buildings literally close in on you as you walk, creating an oppressive tunnel effect that makes even the bravest visitors feel trapped. Some of these passages are so narrow that 2 people can barely pass each other without touching, a fact that becomes terrifying when you realize that touching a stranger in Roman streets often leads to accusations of pickpocketing. The sound of pottery shattering echoes from somewhere above, followed by a string of Latin curses that would make a sailor blush. Romans had a charming habit of emptying their chamber pots directly out their windows, and they weren't particularly concerned about timing or aim. The phrase, "Look before you leap," originated from Roman streets, where looking up was literally a matter of life and death, or at least personal hygiene. The wealthy districts had slaves whose job was to shout warnings before dumping waste, but in the poorer areas where you're likely to end up, such courtesies were considered luxury items. The smell gets worse as you go deeper into the city. What you're experiencing is the concentrated essence of 1 million people living without proper sewage systems. The famous Roman aqueducts brought clean water in, but they didn't do much about getting the dirty water out. Historians still argue whether the Romans were brilliant engineers or just really good at solving half of every problem they encountered. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer, was an engineering marvel that primarily served the Forum and wealthy areas, leaving the rest of the city to develop creative solutions that usually involved throwing everything into the streets. Romans who had to travel at night would rub mint leaves under their noses to mask the smell, but mint was expensive and hard to find after dark. The reality is that Rome smelled like a combination of unwashed bodies, rotting food, animal waste, and burning oil, with occasional hints of vomit and blood for variety. Street vendors sold small clay pots filled with aromatic herbs for nighttime travelers, but these were often contaminated with substances that made the original smell seem pleasant by comparison. You pause to listen. The distant sound of breaking glass and shouting voices is getting closer. In Roman streets, noise travels in unpredictable ways due to the narrow passages and tall buildings. What sounds like it's coming from your left might actually be happening directly above you, and what sounds far away could be just around the next corner. The acoustic properties of Roman architecture created what modern sound engineers would call a nightmare scenario. Echoes bounced off stone walls in patterns that made it impossible to determine the source or distance of any sound. Roman criminals developed a sophisticated system of communication using echoes and sound patterns. Thieves would use specific whistle patterns to coordinate attacks, and the narrow streets amplified these signals perfectly. Learning the difference between normal Roman street noise and the sounds that mean you're about to become someone's victim becomes crucial for survival. A short whistle followed by 2 long ones meant, "Mark approaching from the north," while 3 quick whistles meant, "Abort and scatter." The irony is that these same acoustic properties that helped criminals also helped their victims, if you knew what to listen for. The flickering light from a distant torch creates dancing shadows on the walls, and every shadow looks like a potential attacker. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from earlier? Romans had an equally bizarre nighttime ritual. They believed that carrying a piece of iron would protect them from evil spirits. This shows just how terrified even the locals were of their own streets after dark. Some Romans wore iron rings, others carried iron nails, and the truly paranoid wore iron amulets sewn into their clothing. Your feet are starting to ache from the uneven cobblestones, and you realize that Roman street construction prioritized durability over comfort. The stones were laid in patterns designed to channel rainwater toward the gutters, but they also created a surface that was treacherous to navigate in darkness. Many of the stones were loose, having been disturbed by the constant traffic of carts, horses, and foot traffic. Stepping on a loose stone could send you tumbling into the filth-filled gutters, or worse, Alert every criminal in the area to your exact location. Roman mothers used to say that the streets had teeth. Every doorway could hide a mugger, every alleyway could be a dead end, and every step forward takes you deeper into an urban nightmare that makes modern cities look like peaceful gardens. The architecture itself seems designed to trap and confuse, with dead ends that appear to be throughways and passages that suddenly narrow to impassable gaps. Finding shelter in ancient Rome, as you're about to discover, is even more dangerous than staying on the streets. The warm glow spilling from a nearby doorway feels like salvation after the oppressive darkness of the streets. You stumble toward what appears to be a tavern, or papina, as the Romans call it, drawn by the promise of light, warmth, and perhaps something to eat that won't kill you immediately. The wooden sign hanging above the entrance depicts a wine cup and what might be a fish, though in the flickering torchlight it could just as easily be a dagger. Either way, you're desperate enough to take your chances. Pushing through the heavy wooden door, you're immediately assaulted by a wall of noise, smoke, and heat that makes the street seem peaceful by comparison. The papina is packed with the kind of people your mother warned you about: dock workers with scarred hands, off-duty soldiers still wearing their armor, merchants who look like they've never made an honest deal in their lives, and women whose profession becomes obvious the moment they smile at you. The air is thick with smoke from oil lamps, and the smell of cooking food mixed with unwashed bodies and spilled wine. Roman taverns operate under a simple philosophy: everything is negotiable, nothing is guaranteed, and violence is always on the menu. The proprietor, a thick-set man with arms like tree trunks and a face that suggests he's been in more fights than he's won, eyes you with the calculating gaze of someone trying to determine whether you're worth robbing or just overcharging. His establishment caters to Rome's night crowd, which means the wine is watered, the food is questionable, and the entertainment often involves watching someone get stabbed. You approach what passes for a bar, a wooden plank supported by 2 barrels, and attempt to order something safe. The proprietor grins, revealing teeth that have seen better decades, and pours you a cup of what he claims is wine. The liquid is the color of rust and has the consistency of thin soup, with floating particles that you hope are just sediment. Roman tavern wine is typically diluted with water at a ratio of 3:1, but in establishments like this, the ratio leans heavily toward whatever liquid was cheapest that day. The food situation is equally promising. A large pot bubbles over a fire in the corner, tended by a woman whose hygiene standards appear to be more of a suggestion than a rule. The stew contains what the proprietor enthusiastically describes as meat, though historians still argue whether Roman tavern cooks were more creative with their ingredients, or just better at hiding the evidence. The chunks floating in the brown liquid could be beef, pork, or something that wandered in from the street and never wandered out. A commotion erupts near the back of the tavern as 2 men begin arguing over a dice game. Roman gambling was technically illegal, but like most Roman laws, this one was more of a guideline that could be ignored for the right price. The argument escalates quickly from accusations of cheating to threats of violence, with other patrons placing bets on who will draw a knife first. The proprietor watches with the bored expression of someone who's seen this exact scenario play out dozens of times. You try to find a quiet corner where you can eat your questionable stew and plan your next move, but privacy in a Roman papina is like honesty in Roman politics: theoretically possible but practically non-existent. Every table is shared, every conversation is public, and every patron is either trying to sell you something, steal from you, or convince you to participate in activities that would make your ancestors disown you. The woman sitting across from you introduces herself as Claudia and immediately begins explaining her rates for various services, none of which involve conversation. The dice game argument has now attracted a crowd, with spectators shouting encouragement and placing increasingly elaborate wagers. Roman tavern fights follow a predictable pattern. They start with accusations, escalate to insults about someone's mother, and conclude with someone bleeding on the floor while everyone else returns to their drinks as if nothing happened. The proprietor keeps a collection of clubs behind the bar for situations that get out of hand, though he seems more concerned about damage to his furniture than damage to his customers. Your meal is interrupted by a crash as one of the gamblers goes flying across a table, scattering cups and sending other patrons scrambling for safety. The fight spreads quickly, as tavern fights tend to do, with people who have no stake in the original argument suddenly throwing punches at whoever happens to be nearest. You duck under your table as a chair sails over your head, wondering if the streets might actually be safer than this supposed refuge. The proprietor finally intervenes, not to stop the fight but to ensure that someone pays for the broken furniture. He wades into the melee with practiced efficiency, cracking skulls with his club until order is restored. The original combatants are dragged outside, where their argument will presumably continue without damaging his property. The other patrons dust themselves off and return to their drinks as if massive brawls are just another form of entertainment. As you emerge from under your table, you realize that Roman taverns are less about hospitality and more about survival. The food might not kill you immediately, the wine might not blind you permanently, and the other patrons might not rob you if you're lucky. But staying here much longer increases the odds that you'll become part of the evening's entertainment, and not in a good way. Finding somewhere to sleep for the night is becoming an increasingly urgent priority. The tavern's chaos has convinced you that finding proper shelter is no longer optional, it's a matter of survival. You slip out into the night air, which now feels refreshingly clean compared to the smoky interior, and begin searching for somewhere to spend the remaining hours until dawn. Your options in ancient Rome are limited and uniformly terrible. You can try to rent a room in one of the towering apartment buildings called insulae, sleep rough in a doorway and hope the vigiles don't arrest you, or attempt to find sanctuary in a temple and pray the priests don't sacrifice you to their gods. The insulae loom above you like ancient skyscrapers, some reaching 6 or 7 stories into the night sky. These apartment blocks house the majority of Rome's population in conditions that would make modern slums seem luxurious. The ground floors are reserved for shops and the wealthy, while the upper floors become progressively cheaper, more dangerous, and more likely to collapse without warning. As a desperate traveler with limited funds, you're looking at the top floors, assuming you can survive the climb. You approach the nearest insula, a towering structure that creaks ominously in the night breeze. The building's entrance is guarded by a doorkeeper whose job is less about security and more about collecting bribes from tenants who want to avoid being robbed in the stairwell. He eyes you with the practiced assessment of someone who's seen every type of desperate person Rome has to offer, from runaway slaves to bankrupt merchants to foreign visitors who've made catastrophically poor life choices. The negotiation begins immediately. Roman apartment rentals operate on a complex system of official rates, unofficial surcharges, and creative interpretations of what constitutes furnished. The doorkeeper explains that a room on the 6th floor is available for the night, but the price includes mandatory fees for stair maintenance, building security, fire insurance, and what he euphemistically calls structural stability contributions. The total cost would bankrupt a small merchant, but you're in no position to negotiate. Climbing the stairs becomes an exercise in terror and endurance. Roman insulae were built quickly and cheaply, with each floor added as an afterthought to the one below. The staircase is narrow, poorly lit, and constructed from wood that groans under your weight. Each step upward takes you further from any hope of escape if the building catches fire, which happens with alarming frequency. The walls are thin enough that you can hear every conversation, argument, and intimate encounter happening in the surrounding apartments. The 2nd floor smells like cooking food and human waste. The 3rd floor adds the aroma of unwashed bodies and rotting garbage. By the 4th floor, you're breathing through your mouth to avoid the combination of smells that would challenge even the most hardened sewer worker. The 5th floor introduces new scents that you can't identify and don't want to. By the time you reach the 6th floor, you're questioning every decision that led you to this moment. Your room, when you finally reach it, is a masterpiece of Roman efficiency, meaning it's barely large enough for a human being and contains nothing that could be considered furniture. The space measures roughly 6 feet by 8 feet, with a ceiling so low that you have to duck to avoid hitting your head. The walls are made of wood and plaster that's cracking in several places, and the single window is just a hole in the wall with no glass or shutters. The floor is bare wood that's warped and stained with substances you prefer not to contemplate. The building's structural integrity becomes immediately apparent as you settle in for the night. Every footstep from the floors above sounds like thunder, every door that closes shakes the entire structure, and every gust of wind makes the building sway like a ship in a storm. Roman insulae were notorious for collapsing without warning, crushing their inhabitants under tons of rubble and timber. Historians still argue whether more Romans died from building collapses or fires, but both were common enough that insurance companies refused to cover upper-floor apartments. Fire represents the most immediate threat to your survival. Roman insulae were essentially giant kindling boxes, built from wood and filled with oil lamps, cooking fires, and other ignition sources. The narrow staircase that was difficult to climb becomes impossible to descend when filled with panicked residents and thick smoke. Fire brigades existed in Rome, but their primary function was to prevent fires from spreading to important buildings, not to rescue people trapped in burning insulae. Your neighbors make their presence known through the thin walls. To your left, a family with what sounds like 17 children is conducting some sort of religious ceremony that involves chanting and rhythmic drumming. To your right, a couple is having an argument about money that's escalating toward violence. Above you, someone is either moving furniture or practicing gladiatorial combat. Below you, the sounds suggest activities that would make the tavern prostitutes blush. Sleep becomes impossible as the building's nighttime symphony reaches full volume. Roman insulae never truly quiet down, they just transition from daytime noise to nighttime noise. The sounds of crying babies, arguing couples, barking dogs, and mysterious crashes blend into a cacophony that makes the streets seem peaceful by comparison. You begin to understand why wealthy Romans lived in single-family homes with thick walls and private courtyards. As you lie on the bare wooden floor, using your cloak as both mattress and blanket, you realize that Roman apartment living is less about shelter and more about survival. The building could collapse, catch fire, or simply decide to evict you at any moment. Your fellow tenants could rob you, assault you, or involve you in their various illegal activities. And if you somehow survive until morning, you'll still need to navigate the staircase again, assuming it's still there when you wake up. The urgent pressure in your bladder becomes impossible to ignore as the night wears on, forcing you to confront one of ancient Rome's most terrifying realities: the bathroom situation. What you're about to discover will make every complaint you've ever had about public restrooms seem laughably trivial. Roman toilet facilities were designed by people who apparently believed that privacy, hygiene, and basic human dignity were optional luxuries that interfered with efficient waste management. Your first option is the building's communal latrine, located in the basement, and shared by all residents of the insula. The journey down 6 flights of creaking stairs in complete darkness is treacherous enough, but the destination makes the trip seem like a pleasant stroll. The latrine consists of a long wooden bench with holes cut at regular intervals, positioned over a channel of running water that's supposed to carry waste away from the building. The reality is somewhat different from the theory. The smell hits you before you reach the bottom of the stairs, a concentrated essence of human waste mixed with the sickly sweet aroma of decomposition and the sharp tang of ammonia. Romans used urine for cleaning purposes, collecting it in large jars and allowing it to ferment until it reached the perfect consistency for laundering clothes or cleaning floors. The basement latrine serves as both bathroom and urine collection facility, creating an olfactory experience that would challenge even the most hardened sewer worker. The communal aspect of Roman toilets becomes immediately apparent as you enter the latrine. Privacy was not a Roman concept when it came to bodily functions. The toilet bench accommodates multiple users simultaneously, with no partitions or barriers between the holes. Conversation during toilet use was not only acceptable but encouraged, with many Romans conducting business meetings and social gatherings while relieving themselves. The phrase, "getting down to business," takes on new meaning in this context. Roman toilet paper consisted of a communal sponge attached to a stick, soaked in salt water or vinegar and shared among all users. The sponge was rinsed between uses, though the definition of clean was considerably more flexible than modern standards would suggest. Wealthy Romans sometimes brought their own personal sponges, but as a desperate traveler, you're stuck with whatever communal equipment is available. The thought of using a sponge that's been shared by dozens of other people makes holding it until morning seem like an increasingly attractive option. The running water system that's supposed to flush waste away from the building works sporadically at best. Roman engineers were brilliant at bringing clean water into the city, but they were less successful at getting dirty water out. The channels beneath the toilet bench often become clogged with waste, creating stagnant pools that breed disease and attract rats. The rats, incidentally, are not afraid of humans and have been known to bite people in sensitive areas while they're using the facilities. Your second option is to use one of the public latrines scattered throughout the city, but venturing back onto the streets presents its own set of challenges. Roman public toilets were social gathering places where citizens would meet to discuss politics, conduct business, and exchange gossip while attending to their bodily needs. The facilities were often decorated with mosaics and frescoes, creating an oddly civilized atmosphere for such a basic function. However, Reaching a public latrine requires navigating the dangerous streets and risking encounters with criminals who specifically target people in vulnerable positions. The third option, and the one chosen by many desperate Romans, is to simply use the streets as a toilet. This practice was so common that it was regulated by law, with specific penalties for defecating in certain areas of the city. The streets already served as repositories for chamber pot contents, so adding to the collection seemed like a natural solution. However, this approach carries the risk of arrest by the vigiles, who patrolled the streets looking for people violating public decency laws. Roman attitudes toward bodily functions were simultaneously more open and more restrictive than modern sensibilities. While communal toileting was perfectly acceptable, there were strict rules about when, where, and how one could relieve oneself. Urinating against certain buildings was punishable by fines, defecating near temples could result in religious sanctions, and using the wrong type of cleaning materials could mark you as a barbarian or slave. The health implications of Roman toilet practices were catastrophic by modern standards. The communal sponges spread diseases with remarkable efficiency. The stagnant water in clogged channels bred parasites and bacteria, and the lack of proper hand-washing facilities meant that every surface in the city was contaminated with fecal matter. Historians still argue whether Roman life expectancy was shortened more by warfare, disease, or simply using the bathroom, but all three were significant factors in the empire's mortality rates. As you contemplate your limited options, you begin to understand why many Romans preferred to hold their bodily functions until daylight, when at least they could see what they were getting into. The darkness adds an extra layer of horror to an already nightmarish situation, making every surface potentially contaminated and every shadow a possible hiding place for rats, criminals, or worse. The phrase, "when nature calls," takes on new urgency when nature is calling in ancient Rome, and the available facilities make answering that call an act of desperation rather than relief. Your bladder's demands become increasingly urgent as you weigh the risks of each option, knowing that whatever choice you make will likely leave you questioning your life decisions and longing for the simple luxury of a private, clean bathroom with actual toilet paper. Your desperate search for bathroom facilities has led you deeper into Rome's shadowy underworld, where you encounter the city's most dangerous residents, the criminals who own the night. Roman crime operates with the efficiency of a well-organized business, complete with hierarchies, territories, and professional standards that would impress modern organized crime families. What you're about to experience is a crash course in Roman criminal enterprise, where survival depends on understanding the unwritten rules of a society that operates parallel to legitimate Roman civilization. The first criminals you encounter are the pickpockets, known as locarii, who work the crowded areas around taverns and public buildings. These aren't desperate amateurs grabbing purses. They're skilled professionals who've elevated theft to an art form. Roman pickpockets work in teams, with lookouts, distractors, and specialists who can remove your money pouch without you feeling a thing. They target foreigners specifically, recognizing visitors by their clothing, gait, and the confused expression that marks someone unfamiliar with Roman street customs. A young boy approaches you with the innocent request for directions, speaking in broken Latin that suggests he's a recent arrival to the city. While you're trying to help him, his partner, a girl who couldn't be more than 12, is systematically emptying your pockets with the skill of a surgeon. Roman criminal organizations recruited children for theft operations because the penalties for juvenile crime were less severe, and children could access spaces and situations that adults couldn't. The practice was so common that experienced Romans automatically checked their belongings after any interaction with street children. The next level of Roman criminal hierarchy consists of the cut purses and muggers who target individuals in isolated areas. These criminals, known as latrones, operate with a business model based on volume and efficiency. They prefer quick robberies that don't attract attention from the vigiles or other authorities. Roman muggers developed sophisticated techniques for subduing victims without causing fatal injuries. Dead bodies attracted unwanted official attention, while injured victims were simply part of the cost of doing business in the empire's capital. You witness a mugging in progress as you round a corner, watching three men surround a well-dressed merchant who made the mistake of traveling alone after dark. The robbery follows a practiced routine. One criminal blocks the victim's escape route, another demands money while displaying a knife, and the third searches for hidden valuables. The entire operation takes less than 2 minutes, with the criminals disappearing into the maze of alleyways before their victim can even call for help. The merchant is left alive but significantly poorer, which represents a successful transaction in the Roman criminal economy. Roman organized crime was dominated by collegia, professional associations that operated legitimate businesses during the day and criminal enterprises at night. These organizations controlled specific neighborhoods and industries, offering protection services to merchants and residents who could afford their fees. The protection was genuine. Paying customers were safe from other criminal organizations, but refusing to pay resulted in becoming a target for the same group offering protection. It was an early form of organized racketeering that would be familiar to modern crime families. The most dangerous criminals you encounter are the sicarii, professional assassins who specialize in political murders and contract killings. These aren't street thugs looking for quick money. They're skilled killers who command high fees for their services. Roman political life was so violent that assassination was considered a legitimate career path, with successful sicarii earning enough money to retire comfortably after a few high-profile contracts. They got their name from the sicca, a curved dagger that was their weapon of choice for close-quarters killing. Historians still argue whether Roman crime rates were higher or lower than modern cities, but the violence was certainly more personal and immediate. Roman criminals didn't have firearms or modern weapons. They relied on knives, clubs, and their fists to conduct business. This meant that criminal encounters were up-close and personal affairs that required physical courage from both perpetrators and victims. The lack of modern forensic techniques also meant that most crimes went unsolved, creating a culture where criminal activity was limited more by rival gangs than by law enforcement. The criminal underground had its own code of conduct that governed interactions between different organizations and with the legitimate world. Certain areas of the city were considered neutral territory where different gangs could operate without conflict. Specific types of victims were off-limits. Harming a Vestal Virgin or a high-ranking senator could bring down the full weight of imperial justice on the entire criminal community. There were even professional mediators who resolved disputes between criminal organizations without resorting to warfare. Roman criminals developed an elaborate system of signals and codes that allowed them to communicate without alerting authorities or potential victims. Specific graffiti marks indicated which buildings were safe houses, which areas were controlled by particular gangs, and which victims were under the protection of criminal organizations. Learning to read these signs was essential for survival in Roman streets, but the code was deliberately obscure to prevent outsiders from understanding the criminal communication network. As you navigate through territories controlled by different criminal organizations, you begin to understand that Roman crime was less about random violence and more about business operations that happened to be illegal. The criminals you encounter are professionals who've chosen their career path based on economic opportunity rather than desperation. They're organized, efficient, and surprisingly disciplined in their approach to illegal activities. This makes them more predictable than random street violence, but also more dangerous to anyone who interferes with their business operations. Your encounters with Rome's criminal underworld teach you that survival requires understanding the economic and social structures that govern illegal activity, not just avoiding dark alleys and suspicious characters. Your wandering through Rome's criminal territories leads you into an even stranger and more dangerous encounter, stumbling upon one of the city's numerous nocturnal religious ceremonies. What you're witnessing isn't the sanitized, state-approved religion taught in schools. This is the raw, primal spirituality that emerges when Romans think no one is watching. The flickering torchlight ahead reveals a group of hooded figures gathered around what appears to be an altar, chanting in languages that predate Latin and engaging in rituals that would make the official priesthood very nervous. Roman religion after dark was a completely different beast from the daylight ceremonies conducted in marble temples. The night belonged to mystery cults, foreign gods, and religious practices that the Senate would prefer didn't exist. These weren't necessarily evil or dangerous, though some certainly were, but they represented a spiritual underground that operated parallel to official Roman religion. The problem for you, as an unwitting observer, is that most of these ceremonies were supposed to be secret, and witnesses were not always welcome. The group you've stumbled upon appears to be conducting a ritual to Mithras, the Persian god popular among soldiers and merchants. Mithraic ceremonies were exclusively male affairs conducted in underground chambers called Mithraea, but this group has apparently decided that a secluded courtyard will suffice for their midnight devotions. The ritual involves the symbolic slaying of a bull, though thankfully they're using a clay figurine rather than an actual animal. The participants are taking turns drinking from a ceremonial cup while reciting oaths of loyalty and brotherhood. Your presence is detected almost immediately. These aren't casual worshippers but serious devotees who've developed keen awareness of their surroundings. The chanting stops, and several hooded figures turn in your direction with the kind of attention that suggests they're deciding whether you're a threat, a potential convert, or simply someone who needs to disappear permanently. Roman mystery religions took their secrecy seriously, and accidental witnesses sometimes became permanent participants whether they wanted to or not. The leader of the group, identifiable by his more elaborate robes and the fact that everyone else is looking at him for guidance, approaches you with measured steps. His face is painted with symbols that probably have deep religious significance, but look distinctly threatening in the torchlight. He speaks in accented Latin, asking if you're seeking initiation into the mysteries, or if you're simply lost. The question seems casual, but you sense that your answer will determine whether you leave this encounter as a friend, a convert, or a corpse. Roman mystery religions offered something that official state religion couldn't: personal salvation, direct communion with divine forces, and membership in exclusive communities that transcended social class. Slaves could become high-ranking initiates in mystery cults, while senators might remain at lower levels of initiation. This egalitarian aspect made mystery religions popular among Rome's diverse population, but it also made them politically dangerous to authorities who preferred their religion to reinforce existing social hierarchies. You attempt to explain that you're simply a lost traveler seeking shelter for the night, but your explanation is complicated by the fact that you don't know the proper protocols for addressing mystery cult members. Roman religious etiquette was complex under the best circumstances, and mystery religions had their own additional layers of ritual behavior. Speaking the wrong words or making the wrong gestures could mark you as an enemy of their faith, while remaining silent might suggest that you're a spy sent by hostile authorities. The Mithraic worshippers debate your fate in hushed tones, occasionally glancing in your direction while making hand gestures that probably have religious significance. Historians still argue whether mystery religions were generally tolerant of outsiders or if their secrecy was maintained through more aggressive means. But you're about to get first-hand experience of their policies regarding uninvited guests. The discussion seems to center on whether your arrival is a sign from their god or simply bad timing on your part. Other mystery religions were far less welcoming to accidental observers. The cult of Dionysus, officially banned but still practiced in secret, was notorious for ceremonies that involved ritual intoxication, sexual activities, and occasionally human sacrifice. The cult of Cybele featured self-mutilation rituals that left participants permanently altered in ways that made them unemployable in normal Roman society. The Egyptian mystery religions involved elaborate death and resurrection ceremonies that could last for days and sometimes resulted in actual deaths when participants took the symbolism too seriously. The Mithraic leader returns with what appears to be a decision. He explains that their god has spoken through the sacred flames, indicating that your arrival is indeed a sign, though he's deliberately vague about what kind of sign it might be. You're invited to participate in their ceremony as a guest, with the understanding that what you witnessed tonight must never be discussed with outsiders. The alternative, he suggests with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes, is to wait outside until they're finished, though he can't guarantee your safety from other nocturnal dangers. Roman mystery religions operated under a complex system of initiation levels, sacred oaths, and ritual obligations that could take years to fully understand. As a guest participant, you're limited to observing the outer mysteries while the true secrets remain hidden from your view. The ceremony you witness involves symbolic death and rebirth, communion with divine forces, and brotherhood rituals that bind participants together in ways that transcend normal social relationships. The experience leaves you with a deeper understanding of Roman spirituality and a healthy respect for the power of religious communities that operate outside official channels. These aren't desperate people seeking escape from reality. They're serious believers who found meaning and purpose in ancient traditions that predate Roman civilization. Their willingness to risk official persecution for their faith demonstrates a level of commitment that makes them potentially valuable allies or extremely dangerous enemies. As the ceremony concludes and the participants begin to disperse, you realize that you've been granted a rare glimpse into the spiritual underground that sustained millions of Romans through the challenges of imperial life. Your departure from the mystery cult ceremony is abruptly interrupted by the sound of marching feet and the distinctive clank of military armor echoing through the narrow streets. The Praetorian Guard, Rome's elite imperial bodyguards, are conducting one of their infamous midnight patrols, and you've managed to stumble directly into their path. These aren't ordinary soldiers looking for trouble. They're the Emperor's personal security force, trained to view every shadow as a potential assassin and every stranger as a possible threat to Imperial safety. The Praetorians emerge from the darkness like armored ghosts, their polished bronze armor gleaming in the torchlight and their faces hidden behind ceremonial helmets that make them look more like demons than men. Unlike regular legionnaires, who at least pretend to follow rules of engagement, the Praetorian Guard operates under special authority that allows them to arrest, interrogate, or execute anyone they deem suspicious. Their definition of suspicious is notoriously broad and includes being foreign, being out after dark, being in the wrong place, or simply looking at them the wrong way. The patrol leader, identifiable by the elaborate plume on his helmet and the additional decorations on his armor, raises his hand to halt the column and fixes you with a stare that could freeze blood. Roman military discipline has trained him to assess threats with mechanical efficiency, and everything about you screams, potential problem. Your foreign appearance, your obvious unfamiliarity with Roman customs, and your presence in an area known for criminal activity combine to paint you as exactly the kind of person the Praetorians are paid to investigate. The interrogation begins immediately, conducted in the middle of the street with the entire patrol forming a circle around you like a military tribunal. The questions come in rapid succession. Who are you? Where are you from? What are you doing in this area after dark? Do you have papers proving your legal status in the city? Can you account for your movements tonight? The Praetorian leader speaks with the clipped precision of someone accustomed to having his questions answered immediately and completely. Roman bureaucracy has created a complex system of identification documents, travel permits, and residency papers that citizens are expected to carry at all times. As a foreign visitor, you're supposed to have documentation proving your legal right to be in the city, your financial means of support, and your intended length of stay. The problem is that most of these documents are issued during daylight hours by officials who are now safely asleep in their beds, leaving you unable to prove your legitimate status to suspicious guards. Your attempts to explain your situation are complicated by the language barrier and cultural differences that make even simple concepts difficult to communicate. Roman legal terminology is precise and unforgiving, with specific words required for different types of legal status. Calling yourself a visitor instead of a guest could imply that you're conducting business without proper permits. Describing yourself as a traveler might suggest that you're a merchant avoiding taxation. Every word you choose carries legal implications that could make your situation worse. The Praetorians are particularly suspicious of anyone who might be connected to the various plots and conspiracies that constantly swirl around imperial politics. Roman emperors lived in constant fear of assassination, and the Praetorian Guard's primary function was to identify and eliminate potential threats before they could act. This paranoia has created a security apparatus that sees conspiracies everywhere and treats innocent mistakes as evidence of treasonous intent. Historians still argue whether the Praetorian Guard was more effective at protecting emperors or at creating the climate of fear that made assassination attempts more likely, but their reputation for ruthless efficiency was well-deserved. These weren't soldiers who asked questions first and acted later. They were trained to neutralize threats immediately and sort out the details afterward. The fact that you're still alive and answering questions suggests that they haven't yet decided whether you're dangerous or just stupid. The patrol leader produces a wax tablet and begins recording your answers with the methodical precision of someone who's conducted hundreds of similar interrogations. Roman military record-keeping was obsessively detailed, with reports filed on every interaction between imperial forces and civilians. Your encounter tonight will become part of an official record that could follow you for the rest of your stay in Rome, assuming you survive long enough to have a rest of your stay. The questioning takes an ominous turn when the patrol leader asks about your knowledge of recent political events and your opinions on imperial policy. These aren't casual conversation topics. They're loyalty tests designed to identify potential dissidents or foreign agents. Roman law made criticism of the emperor a capital offense, and the Praetorians had broad authority to interpret what constituted criticism. Expressing the wrong opinion, or even failing to express sufficient enthusiasm for imperial policies, could result in immediate arrest. Your situation becomes more precarious when one of the Praetorians claims to recognize you from earlier in the evening, though his description doesn't match your actual activities. Roman witness testimony was notoriously unreliable, but accusations from imperial guards carried significant weight in legal proceedings. The possibility that you might be confused with someone else who actually committed a crime adds another layer of danger to an already perilous situation. The patrol leader's questions become increasingly specific and threatening as he probes for inconsistencies in your story. He wants to know exactly where you've been, who you've spoken with, and what you've witnessed during your night in Rome. Your encounter with the mystery cult ceremony becomes particularly problematic. Association with unauthorized religious activities could result in charges of sedition or conspiracy against the state. As the interrogation continues, you begin to understand that the Praetorian Guard represents the iron fist inside Rome's velvet glove of civilization. These men have the power to make you disappear without trial, explanation, or appeal, and their loyalty is to the emperor rather than to any concept of justice or due process. Your tense encounter with the Praetorian Guard finally concludes when a commotion erupts from a nearby street, drawing their attention to what sounds like a full-scale riot. The patrol leader reluctantly releases you with a stern warning about staying out of trouble, but his parting words suggest that your name is now on a list of suspicious individuals who warrant future surveillance. As the armored figures march toward the disturbance, you seize the opportunity to escape in the opposite direction, only to find yourself in an even more dangerous part of the city, the Gladiator District. The area around the Colosseum transforms after dark into a lawless zone where off-duty gladiators, their trainers, and the criminal elements that orbit the games conduct business that would make the arena fights seem tame by comparison. These aren't the noble warriors of popular imagination. They're professional killers who've been trained to view violence as entertainment and human life as expendable. The skills that make them successful in the arena translate perfectly to street fighting, debt collection, and settling personal disputes with lethal efficiency. You can hear them before you see them. The distinctive sound of weapons clashing echoes from a courtyard where several gladiators are settling a dispute over gambling debts. Roman gladiators were technically slaves, but successful fighters enjoyed privileges and freedoms that made them more like highly paid athletes with extremely dangerous job requirements. They lived in barracks near the Colosseum, trained during the day, and were generally free to roam the city at night, provided they didn't cause too much trouble for their owners. The gladiators you encounter represent different fighting styles and specialties from across the empire. A heavily armored Murmillo practices sword techniques against a wooden post, his movements precise and deadly despite the casual nature of his exercise. Aretarius, the net and trident fighter, sits sharpening his weapons while discussing the finer points of crowd psychology with a Thrax whose curved sword and small shield mark him as a Thracian-style combatant. These men are walking encyclopedias of combat techniques, and every conversation revolves around the most efficient ways to kill or maim opponents. Roman gladiator culture operated under its own code of honor that was simultaneously more brutal and more civilized than regular Roman society. Gladiators were expected to face death with dignity, show respect for worthy opponents, and maintain loyalty to their training schools and fellow fighters. However, this code only applied to arena combat. Outside the Colosseum, gladiators were free to use their skills for personal gain, revenge, or simple entertainment. The gambling that surrounds gladiatorial combat continues long after the official games end, with fighters betting on everything from dice games to impromptu combat demonstrations. You witness a betting circle where gladiators are wagering on how quickly one of their number can disable an opponent using only his bare hands. The demonstration is conducted with the casual professionalism of people who've made careers out of violence, and the betting is serious enough that losing could result in genuine bloodshed. Gladiator trainers, known as doctors, patrol the district like military officers inspecting their troops. These men are responsible for maintaining their fighters' skills, health, and discipline, which means they have absolute authority over some of the most dangerous individuals in the Roman Empire. A trainer's word can mean the difference between life and death for a gladiator, and this power extends beyond the arena into the streets where off-duty fighters still answer to their instructors. The social dynamics of gladiator society are complex and often contradictory. Successful gladiators are celebrities who attract crowds of admirers, including wealthy Roman women who find the combination of danger and skill irresistibly attractive. However, there are also slaves who can be bought, sold, or killed at their owner's discretion. This creates a culture where men who are treated like gods in the arena must remember their place as property once the crowds go home. You attempt to navigate through the district without attracting attention, but gladiators are trained to notice everything that happens in their environment. Your obvious nervousness and unfamiliarity with their customs mark you as either a potential victim or a source of entertainment. A group of fighters begins following you with the lazy interest of predators who've spotted easy prey, discussing among themselves whether you're worth the effort of robbing or if you might provide better sport in other ways. Roman law regarding gladiators was deliberately ambiguous, giving them more freedom than ordinary slaves but less protection than free citizens. This legal gray area meant that crimes committed by gladiators were often handled internally by their trainers rather than through official channels. A gladiator who killed someone in a street fight might face punishment from his owner, but he was unlikely to face trial in a Roman court unless the victim was particularly important. The weapons trade that supports gladiatorial combat operates openly in this district, with smiths and merchants selling everything from practice swords to exotic weapons imported from distant provinces. The quality of these weapons is exceptional. Gladiators' lives depend on their equipment, so inferior craftsmanship isn't tolerated. However, the same weapons that provide entertainment in the arena become tools of crime and violence in the streets. Historians still argue whether gladiators were generally more disciplined or more dangerous than regular soldiers, but their training certainly made them more efficient killers. A gladiator who survived multiple arena combats had learned lessons about violence that most people never experienced, and these lessons made them formidable opponents in any conflict. The combination of professional combat training, celebrity status, and legal ambiguity created a class of individuals who operated by their own rules. As you finally escape the gladiator district, you realize that you've encountered yet another layer of Roman society that exists parallel to the official civilization. These men lived by codes of honor that value courage and skill above law and order, creating a subculture where violence is not just accepted but celebrated as the highest form of human achievement. Your escape from the gladiator district leads you into the merchant quarter known as the Forumborium, where you discover that Rome's commercial heart becomes a completely different kind of nightmare after dark. What was once the empire's bustling center of trade and commerce transforms into a chaotic maze of livestock, desperate merchants, and the kind of people who conduct business when honest citizens are asleep. The Forumborium, literally the cattle market, earned its name from the thousands of animals that pass through daily. But at night it becomes clear that the cattle aren't the only beasts you need to worry about. The first challenge you encounter is navigating around the herds of cattle, sheep, and pigs that are penned in temporary enclosures throughout the area. Roman livestock management was a marvel of efficiency during daylight hours, but after dark it became a recipe for disaster. The animals are restless, crowded together in spaces barely adequate for their numbers, and tended by exhausted drovers who've been working since before dawn. The combination of frightened animals, inadequate lighting, and overworked handlers creates conditions where stampedes aren't just possible, they're inevitable. You hear the commotion before you see it, the thunderous sound of hundreds of hooves as a herd of cattle breaks through their temporary fencing and begins charging through the narrow streets. Roman cattle were smaller than modern breeds but no less dangerous when panicked, and a stampede in the confined spaces of the Forumborium could crush anyone unlucky enough to be caught in the wrong place. The drovers are shouting instructions and curses in equal measure, but their voices are lost in the chaos of bellowing animals and splintering wood. Your survival instincts kick in as you scramble for higher ground, climbing onto a merchant's stall just as the leading edge of the stampede thunders past. The cattle are followed by sheep, which are followed by pigs, creating a cascade of panicked livestock that turns the entire district into a living obstacle course. Roman urban planning never adequately addressed the problem of moving large numbers of animals through densely populated areas, and nights like this demonstrate the catastrophic results of that oversight. The merchants who work the night shift in the Forumborium are a special breed of entrepreneur who've learned to profit from chaos and desperation. These aren't the respectable traders who conduct business during daylight hours. They're the dealers in questionable goods, black market operators, and middlemen who facilitate transactions that wouldn't survive official scrutiny. The livestock stampede is just another business opportunity for merchants who've learned to adapt to any situation that might generate profit. You witness a fascinating example of Roman commercial ingenuity, as several merchants immediately begin organizing salvage operations for the damaged goods scattered by the stampede. Broken amphorae of wine and oil create opportunities for entrepreneurs with buckets and sponges, while scattered grain and produce attract merchants who specialize in slightly damaged goods. The Roman economy was remarkably efficient at finding value in what others considered waste, and the Forumborium's night merchants were masters of this particular art. The livestock chaos attracts predators both animal and human. Feral dogs that scavenge in the market during the day become bold enough to attack injured animals, while human scavengers emerge from the shadows to claim anything of value that's been trampled or abandoned. Roman cities supported large populations of people who lived entirely off what others discarded, and events like tonight's stampede provided rare opportunities for significant profit. The Forum Boreum's night shift also includes the less savory aspects of Roman commerce. Slave traders conducting transactions away from public scrutiny, merchants selling goods of questionable origin, and dealers in exotic animals destined for the arena or private collections. The darkness provides cover for business activities that would attract unwanted attention during daylight hours, when official inspectors and tax collectors might ask uncomfortable questions about documentation and provenance. Roman animal husbandry practices become terrifyingly apparent as you navigate through the chaos. The cattle are branded with marks indicating their owners, origins, and destinations, but many of these marks appear to have been altered or obscured. Historians still argue whether cattle rustling was a significant problem in the Roman Empire, but the evidence suggests that livestock theft was common enough to support an entire underground economy of stolen animals and forged documentation. The smell in the Forum Boreum defies description, a combination of animal waste, rotting food, spilled wine, and the metallic scent of blood from animals injured in the stampede. Roman merchants burned incense and aromatic herbs to mask the odors, but nothing could completely eliminate the olfactory assault of thousands of animals confined in inadequate spaces. The smell was so notorious that wealthy Romans avoided the area entirely, leaving the night trade to people who'd either lost their sense of smell or learned to ignore it. Your attempts to find a safe path through the chaos are complicated by the fact that the Forum Boreum's layout changes constantly as merchants move their stalls, animals are relocated, and temporary structures are erected or demolished. What was a clear passage an hour ago might now be blocked by a pen full of aggressive pigs, while routes that seemed impassable could suddenly open when drovers moved their herds to new locations. The human drama unfolding around you rivals any theatrical performance as merchants argue over damaged goods, drovers attempt to recapture escaped animals, and various entrepreneurs try to profit from the chaos. Roman commercial law was complex and often contradictory, leading to disputes that could only be resolved through negotiation, bribery, or violence. The Forum Boreum's night shift operated under its own informal legal system where disputes were settled by whoever had the most friends, the sharpest weapons, or the deepest pockets. As you finally navigate through the worst of the livestock chaos, you realize that Roman commerce was far more dangerous and unpredictable than the sanitized version taught in schools. The Forum Boreum represents the raw edge of imperial trade, where fortunes are made and lost in a single night, and where survival depends on understanding the unwritten rules of a market that never truly sleeps. Your escape from the chaotic Forum Boreum leads you toward what you hope will be a safer route along the Tiber River, but Rome's famous waterway presents its own unique collection of nighttime horrors. The Tiber, which serves as the city's main commercial artery during the day, transforms after dark into a liquid highway for smugglers, body dumpers, and the kind of people who conduct business that requires easy access to flowing water for cleanup purposes. What you're about to discover is that Roman rivers weren't just transportation routes. They were the city's primary waste disposal system, crime scene cleanup service, and occasionally, its graveyard. The first thing that assaults your senses as you approach the riverbank is the smell. A nauseating combination of sewage, rotting fish, industrial waste, and decomposing organic matter that would challenge even the most hardened sewer worker. The famous Cloaca Maxima empties into the Tiber, carrying the waste of 1,000,000 Romans directly into the water that also serves as a source of drinking water for communities downstream. Roman engineering was brilliant at many things, but environmental protection wasn't one of them. The riverbank itself is treacherous terrain, slick with mud that contains substances you don't want to identify and littered with debris that ranges from broken pottery to objects that might once have been human. Roman waste management operated on the principle that anything thrown into the Tiber would eventually become someone else's problem, preferably someone who lived far enough downstream to avoid complaining to Roman authorities. The result is a shoreline that serves as an archaeological record of everything Romans wanted to get rid of. Your progress along the river is interrupted by the sight of several figures dragging what appears to be a body toward the water's edge. Roman law enforcement was notoriously inefficient when it came to investigating deaths that occurred in the city's less respectable districts, and the Tiber provided a convenient solution for disposing of evidence. Bodies thrown into the river would either sink and disappear or float downstream to become someone else's jurisdiction, making murder investigations significantly more complicated for Roman authorities. The men disposing of the body notice your presence and pause their work to assess whether you represent a threat to their operation. Roman criminal organizations had developed sophisticated protocols for handling witnesses to their activities, ranging from bribery and intimidation to permanent solutions that involved joining their previous victim in the river. Your survival depends on convincing them that you're either a threat nor someone whose disappearance would attract unwanted attention. The conversation that follows is conducted in the peculiar mixture of Latin slang and criminal cant that serves as the unofficial language of Rome's underworld. The body disposal team explains that they're conducting a legitimate business operation, removing deceased individuals from locations where their presence might cause problems for living residents. They offer their services to you at reasonable rates, should you ever find yourself with similar disposal needs. Roman entrepreneurship found profit opportunities in every aspect of human existence, including its termination. The Tiber's nocturnal traffic includes smugglers who use small boats to move contraband goods past the customs officials who monitor the main docks during daylight hours. Roman taxation was comprehensive and aggressive, creating a thriving black market for merchants who preferred to avoid official scrutiny of their cargo. The river provides an ideal transportation route for goods that lack proper documentation, have been stolen, or are simply too dangerous or illegal for legitimate commerce. You witness a smuggling operation in progress as several boats converge near a secluded section of riverbank. The cargo being transferred appears to include exotic animals, precious metals, and what might be human beings. The Roman slave trade operated around the clock, and nighttime transfers were common for slaves whose legal status was questionable. The smugglers work with practiced efficiency, moving their cargo from boats to waiting carts while lookouts scanned for approaching authorities. Roman river commerce was regulated by a complex system of permits, taxes, and official inspections that created numerous opportunities for corruption and bribery. The officials responsible for monitoring river traffic were notoriously susceptible to financial incentives, and many smuggling operations were conducted with the tacit approval of authorities who received regular payments for their selective blindness. The system worked well for everyone except the imperial treasury and honest merchants who actually paid their taxes. The water itself presents additional hazards beyond the criminal activity conducted on its banks. The Tiber's current is deceptively strong, and the water is contaminated with sewage, industrial waste, and decomposing organic matter that makes drowning the least of your concerns if you fall in. Roman medical knowledge was advanced for its time, but they had no understanding of waterborne diseases or the health risks associated with contaminated water supplies. Historians still argue whether the Tiber was more polluted or less polluted than modern urban rivers, but contemporary accounts suggest that the smell alone was enough to make people avoid the waterfront unless business required their presence. Romans burned incense and aromatic herbs near the river, but nothing could completely mask the odor of a waterway that served as the primary waste disposal system for one of history's largest cities. Your journey along the riverbank is complicated by the terrain, which alternates between muddy slopes that threaten to send you sliding into the contaminated water and rocky areas where loose stones could cause a fall that would leave you injured and vulnerable to the various predators who hunt along the waterfront. Roman urban planning never adequately addressed pedestrian access to the river, leaving most of the shoreline as an informal zone where official authority was limited and unofficial rules prevailed. The floating debris in the Tiber tells the story of Roman urban life in ways that official histories never capture. Broken pottery, discarded clothing, animal carcasses, and occasional human remains create a floating museum of everything Romans wanted to forget. The river serves as both transportation route and memory hole, carrying away the evidence of imperial civilization's less admirable aspects. As you continue your dangerous journey along the Tiber's banks, you begin to understand that Roman rivers were far more than geographical features. They were integral components of urban infrastructure that handled everything from commerce and transportation to waste disposal and crime scene cleanup. Your treacherous journey along the Tiber is interrupted by the sound of marching feet and shouted commands echoing through the narrow streets behind you. The Vigiles, Rome's night watchmen and fire brigade, are conducting one of their patrol sweeps, and you're about to discover that these aren't the helpful public servants you might expect. Roman law enforcement after dark operated under different rules than daytime policing, with the Vigiles functioning more like an occupying army than a protective force. Their primary mission was maintaining order through intimidation and mass arrests, with individual justice being a secondary concern at best. The Vigiles emerged from the darkness like a military unit, which is exactly what they are. These men are freedmen and slaves organized into cohorts modeled after Roman legions, equipped with military weapons and trained to treat civilian populations as potential enemies. Unlike modern police forces that theoretically serve and protect, the Vigiles exist to control and suppress, using whatever methods prove most efficient for maintaining imperial authority during the dangerous hours when regular citizens are supposed to be safely locked behind their doors. Your first instinct is to hide, but the Vigiles have developed sophisticated techniques for flushing out anyone trying to avoid their patrols. They use torches to illuminate hiding places, dogs to track scents, and coordinated sweeps that make escape nearly impossible once they've decided to clear an area. Roman military tactics adapted for urban warfare proved devastatingly effective against civilians who lacked training, organization, or weapons capable of matching military equipment. The patrol leader spots you attempting to blend into the shadows and immediately signals for his unit to surround your position. The Vigiles move with practiced efficiency, cutting off escape routes while maintaining formation discipline that would impress regular legionnaires. These aren't amateur night watchmen stumbling around in the dark. They're professional soldiers who've adapted military techniques for the specific challenges of urban law enforcement in the world's most dangerous city. The questioning begins immediately, but unlike your earlier encounter with the Praetorian Guard, the vigilas aren't interested in determining your guilt or innocence. Their job is processing arrests efficiently, and everyone they encounter after dark is presumed guilty of something until proven otherwise. Roman law enforcement operated on the principle that innocent people stayed home at night, making anyone found on the streets automatically suspicious regardless of their actual activities or intentions. Your attempts to explain your situation are met with the kind of professional skepticism that comes from years of hearing creative excuses from people caught violating curfew laws. The vigilas have heard every possible explanation for nighttime activity, from family emergencies to religious obligations to simple confusion about the time. Their standard response is to arrest first and allow magistrates to sort out the details during daylight hours, when proper legal procedures can be followed. Roman arrest procedures were designed for efficiency rather than individual rights, with the vigilas empowered to detain anyone they considered potentially dangerous to public order. The definition of potentially dangerous was deliberately broad, including anyone who appeared intoxicated, anyone who couldn't produce proper identification, anyone who seemed nervous when questioned, and anyone who happened to be in the wrong place when the vigilas needed to demonstrate their effectiveness to superior officers. The vigilas' detention facility is a converted warehouse near the river, chosen for its proximity to transportation routes that allow efficient transfer of prisoners to more permanent facilities during daylight hours. The building serves multiple functions: temporary jail, interrogation center, and processing facility for the dozens of people arrested during each night's patrol operations. Roman bureaucracy required detailed records of every arrest, creating a paper trail that followed suspects through the legal system regardless of whether they were actually guilty of any crimes. Inside the detention facility, you discover that you're not alone. The vigilas have arrested a diverse collection of Romans whose only common characteristic is being caught outside after dark. The group includes merchants who stayed late to complete business transactions, slaves sent on errands by their masters, religious devotees returning from ceremonies, and various individuals whose explanations for their nighttime activities range from plausible to creative to completely fabricated. Roman legal procedure required that arrested individuals be brought before magistrates within a reasonable time, but the definition of reasonable was flexible enough to allow the vigilas considerable discretion in scheduling court appearances. Some prisoners might be released the following morning with warnings, while others could spend days or weeks in detention while bureaucrats processed their cases. The system was designed to discourage nighttime activity through the threat of indefinite imprisonment rather than through fair and speedy justice. The vigilas' interrogation techniques were borrowed from military intelligence operations, designed to extract information efficiently rather than to respect individual rights or dignity. Prisoners were questioned about their activities, associates, and knowledge of criminal operations in their neighborhoods. The information gathered during these sessions was used to build intelligence networks that helped the vigilas identify potential troublemakers and criminal organizations operating in their patrol areas. Historians still argue whether the vigilas were more effective at preventing crime or at creating the climate of fear that made Roman citizens afraid to leave their homes after dark, but their impact on nighttime urban life was undeniable. The knowledge that arrest was possible at any moment for any reason made Romans extremely cautious about their after-dark activities, effectively implementing a city-wide curfew without officially declaring one. The detention facilities' conditions reflect Roman attitudes toward the rights of arrested individuals. The building is overcrowded, poorly ventilated, and equipped with minimal facilities for basic human needs. Prisoners are expected to provide their own food, water, and bedding, creating a system where wealth determines comfort level even in jail. Those who can afford to pay guards for better treatment receive it, while those without resources suffer in conditions that would challenge hardened criminals. Your fellow prisoners represent a cross-section of Roman society caught in the machinery of nighttime law enforcement. Their stories reveal the arbitrary nature of vigiles arrests, and the difficulty of proving innocence once you've been labeled suspicious by Roman authorities. Some have been arrested multiple times for the same activities, while others are experiencing their first encounter with the Roman justice system and learning that legal theory and legal practice are often completely different things. As dawn approaches and you await your turn before a magistrate, you begin to understand that the vigiles represent the iron fist of Roman order, designed to maintain control through fear and intimidation rather than through justice and protection. Your release from the vigiles detention facility comes with the first rays of dawn, but freedom brings its own challenges as you emerge into a Rome that's beginning its daily transformation from nightmare to civilization. The early morning hours represent a dangerous transition period when the night's predators haven't yet retreated and the day's legitimate activities haven't fully begun. You find yourself caught between two worlds: the criminal underworld that owns the darkness, and the respectable society that emerges with sunlight, either of which offers guaranteed safety to someone who's spent the night navigating Rome's most dangerous territories. The streets around the detention facility are already bustling with activity as vendors begin setting up their stalls for the day's business. Roman commerce starts early, with merchants arriving before dawn to claim the best locations and prepare their goods for the flood of customers that will arrive once the city fully awakens. However, these early morning vendors represent a different class of entrepreneur than the respectable merchants who dominate daytime trade. They're the dealers in questionable goods, the sellers of items that work better in dim light, and the entrepreneurs who've learned to profit from the transition between Rome's night and day economies. Your first priority is finding food, but the breakfast options available at dawn reflect the reality that most Romans don't eat elaborate morning meals. Street vendors offer simple fare: bread, cheese, olives, and watered wine that's barely stronger than vinegar. The quality is questionable and the hygiene standards would horrify modern health inspectors. But after a night of surviving Roman streets, you're grateful for anything that might provide energy for whatever challenges the day might bring. The bread vendor you approach operates from a cart that's seen better decades, selling loaves that are hard enough to use as weapons and flavored with ingredients that might or might not be intentional. Roman bread was the foundation of the imperial diet, but the quality varied dramatically depending on the grain used, the skill of the baker, and the honesty of the merchants involved in the supply chain. The loaves available at dawn are typically made from the cheapest grain and baked by people who prioritize quantity over quality. As you eat your questionable breakfast, you observe the fascinating process of Rome's daily rebirth. The city that seemed like a post-apocalyptic nightmare just hours ago is gradually transforming into the civilized metropolis that tourists and historians celebrate. Shop owners are opening their establishments. Slaves are beginning their daily routines, and the first respectable citizens are venturing onto streets that were death traps just a few hours earlier. The transformation isn't instantaneous or complete. Remnants of the night's activities are still visible to anyone who knows what to look for. Bloodstains on cobblestones that will be washed away by the first rain, broken pottery from tavern fights that will be swept up by street cleaners, and the occasional body that hasn't yet been discovered by authorities or disposed of by whoever was responsible for its current condition. Roman urban cleanup was efficient but not immediate, leaving evidence of nighttime chaos visible to early morning observers. You witnessed the changing of the guard as the vigilas end their patrol shifts and regular urban officials begin their daily routines. The transition involves a complex handover of information about the night's arrests, incidents, and ongoing investigations. Roman bureaucracy required detailed documentation of law enforcement activities, creating paper trails that followed suspects and incidents through multiple levels of authority. The reports filed by night patrol units would influence daytime legal proceedings and administrative decisions. The early morning crowd includes people whose activities bridge the gap between night and day. Bakers who've been working since before midnight, dock workers loading and unloading ships that arrived during the night, and various service providers whose jobs require them to be active during the dangerous transition hours. These Romans have developed survival strategies that allow them to navigate the city safely during its most unpredictable period, and observing their behavior provides valuable lessons in urban survival. Roman social dynamics become visible as the city awakens, with clear distinctions between those who can afford to sleep safely through the night and those who must work or travel during dangerous hours. Wealthy Romans emerge from their secure homes refreshed and protected, while working-class citizens show the wear and stress of surviving another night in the imperial capital. The class differences that are subtle during daylight hours become starkly apparent in the early morning when the effects of nighttime survival are still visible. The market stalls that are opening for business represent a completely different economic ecosystem than the night markets you encountered earlier. These are legitimate enterprises with proper permits, official weights and measures, and merchandise that can withstand daylight scrutiny. The contrast between night and day commerce illustrates the dual nature of Roman economic life, where the same city supported both respectable trade and criminal enterprise depending on the time of day. Your survival of the night has provided you with knowledge that most Romans prefer to ignore, the reality that their civilized city depends on a complex infrastructure of violence, crime, and exploitation that operates parallel to official society. The Rome celebrated in histories and tourist guides exists primarily during daylight hours, while the Rome you've experienced represents the foundation that makes daytime civilization possible. As the morning progresses and more legitimate activity fills the streets, you begin to feel safer but also more aware of how precarious that safety actually is. Roman civilization was a thin veneer over a foundation of barely controlled chaos, and your night of survival has shown you exactly how thin that veneer could be. The knowledge that Rome could transform from civilization to nightmare in the space of a few hours changes your perspective on everything from architecture to social customs. The early morning vendors are already gossiping about the night's events, sharing stories of arrests, fights, fires, and various disasters that occurred while respectable Romans slept safely in their beds. This informal news network provides information that never appears in official records, giving you insight into the true scope of nighttime violence and chaos that Rome's authorities preferred to minimize or ignore entirely. Your desperate search for genuine sanctuary leads you toward the Temple District, where Rome's religious buildings offer the promise of sacred protection from the chaos that has defined your night. Roman temples weren't just places of worship. They were legal sanctuaries where even the most hardened criminals could claim temporary protection from pursuit, provided they understood the complex rules governing religious asylum. However, what you're about to discover is that Roman temple sanctuary comes with its own unique set of dangers, politics, and survival challenges that make even the streets seem straightforward by comparison. The Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus looms before you like a marble fortress, its columns gleaming in the early morning light, and its steps crowded with the kind of people who seek divine intervention when human solutions have failed. Roman temples attracted desperate individuals from every level of society, runaway slaves seeking freedom, debtors avoiding creditors, criminals escaping justice, and ordinary citizens who'd made enemies powerful enough to threaten their lives. The steps of major temples served as informal refugee camps where Rome's most desperate residents gathered under the protection of the gods. Your approach to the temple is immediately noticed by the professional beggars who've claimed territory on the temple steps. Roman begging was a highly organized profession with established hierarchies, territorial boundaries, and sophisticated techniques for extracting money from worshippers who believed that charitable giving would earn divine favor. The beggars who work temple districts are the elite of their profession, skilled in reading potential donors and crafting appeals that combine religious guilt with emotional manipulation. The head beggar, identifiable by his prime location near the temple entrance and the deference shown by other beggars, approaches you with the practiced assessment of someone who's spent decades evaluating the financial potential of temple visitors. He immediately recognizes you as someone who's survived a dangerous night and offers his services as a guide to temple protocol, sanctuary law, and the unofficial rules that govern religious asylum. His knowledge comes at a price, but refusing his guidance could result in violations of religious law that would make your sanctuary worthless. Roman temple sanctuary operated under complex legal principles that combined religious law, civil law, and imperial decree in ways that even trained lawyers found confusing. The right to sanctuary was real but limited, with specific procedures that had to be followed exactly or the protection would be void. You must formally request sanctuary from the appropriate priest, make the required offerings to the temple's deity, and demonstrate that your need for protection is legitimate rather than simply convenient. Failure to follow proper procedures could result in immediate expulsion from sacred grounds. The priests who control temple sanctuary are not the benevolent spiritual guides you might expect, but hard-nosed administrators who've learned to balance religious obligations with political realities. The chief priest who interviews sanctuary seekers has the authority to grant or deny protection based on criteria that include the nature of your alleged crimes, your ability to pay temple fees, and the political implications of harboring you. Roman priests were often more concerned with maintaining their temple's relationships with imperial authorities than with providing unconditional divine protection. Your interview with the temple priest reveals the complex politics that govern religious sanctuary in imperial Rome. The priest must balance his religious duty to provide protection with his practical need to avoid harboring individuals who might bring unwanted attention from imperial authorities. Temples that gained reputations for sheltering enemies of the state could lose their official recognition, their tax exemptions, and their priests' legal immunity. The result is a careful screening process that evaluates sanctuary seekers based on political as well as religious criteria. The temple's current sanctuary population includes a fascinating cross-section of Roman society's failures and victims. A former senator who backed the wrong political faction sits next to a gladiator who killed a spectator during an arena demonstration. A merchant who defaulted on loans to powerful creditors shares space with a slave who struck his master in self-defense. Each person has a story that illustrates different aspects of Roman law, politics, and social structure, and each faces different challenges in securing long-term protection. Roman temple sanctuary was temporary by design, intended to provide breathing space for resolving conflicts rather than permanent refuge from consequences. Sanctuary seekers were expected to negotiate settlements with their pursuers, arrange safe passage to other jurisdictions, or find powerful patrons who could provide ongoing protection. The temple served as neutral ground for these negotiations, but the priests made it clear that their hospitality had limits and their patience wasn't infinite. The daily routine of temple sanctuary reveals the challenges of surviving under religious protection. Sanctuary seekers must participate in daily religious observances, contribute to temple maintenance through labor or donations, and follow strict behavioral codes that govern everything from speech to personal hygiene. Violations of temple rules could result in immediate expulsion, leaving former sanctuary seekers worse off than when they arrived. The priests maintained discipline through a combination of religious authority and practical threats that make temple life surprisingly regimented. The territorial disputes among sanctuary seekers create a complex social hierarchy within the temple grounds. Prime sleeping locations, access to food donations, and proximity to priests who might provide favorable treatment are all contested resources that generate conflicts among people who are supposedly under divine protection. Roman competitive instincts don't disappear just because someone has claimed religious sanctuary, and the temple becomes a microcosm of imperial society with its own power struggles and social dynamics. Historians still argue whether Roman temple sanctuary was more effective at protecting the innocent or at providing convenient refuge for the guilty. But the system clearly served important social functions beyond simple religious observance. Temples provided safety valves for social tensions, neutral ground for resolving conflicts, and alternatives to violence for people who might otherwise resort to desperate measures. The sanctuary system allowed Roman society to manage its most dangerous individuals without resorting to mass executions or permanent imprisonment. Your time in temple sanctuary provides insight into the complex relationship between religion and politics in imperial Rome. The gods may offer protection, but that protection operates within human systems that are subject to political pressures, economic constraints, and social hierarchies. Divine sanctuary is real, but it's administered by mortals who must balance spiritual obligations with practical considerations that sometimes conflict with religious ideals. As you settle into the temple's protective embrace, you realize that even sacred sanctuary requires its own survival strategies and political awareness. The temple may offer protection from external threats, but it creates new challenges that require different skills and different forms of vigilance than surviving on Rome's dangerous streets. The sun climbs higher over the 7 hills of Rome, painting the marble temples and towering insulae in shades of gold that transform the nightmare city of your memories into something approaching the civilized metropolis of legend. From your sanctuary on the temple steps, You watch as Rome completes its daily metamorphosis from predator to paradise, though your night of survival has taught you that this transformation is more illusion than reality. The same streets that nearly claimed your life just hours ago now bustle with merchants, citizens, and tourists who have no idea how close they are to the chaos that lurks beneath their civilized veneer. The morning light reveals details that were hidden in darkness, allowing you to see the full scope of what you've survived. The bloodstains on cobblestones that seemed so ominous in torchlight now appear as minor discolorations that will disappear with the next rain. The menacing alleyways that threaten to become your tomb are revealed as ordinary passages between buildings, narrow but navigable in daylight. The buildings that seem to lean inward like grasping fingers are simply examples of Roman architecture designed to maximize space in a crowded urban environment. Your fellow sanctuary seekers are stirring as the temple priests begin the morning rituals that mark the official start of another day in the Eternal City. The senator who fled political persecution looks remarkably ordinary in daylight, his expensive toga unable to disguise the fact that he's just another desperate man seeking divine protection from human enemies. The gladiator who seemed so terrifying in the temple's shadows is revealed as a scarred but fundamentally human individual whose survival skills differ from yours only in their specific applications. The beggars who control the temple steps are organizing themselves for another day of professional charity extraction, their territorial disputes and hierarchical arrangements becoming visible as they claim their assigned positions. The head beggar who guided you through sanctuary protocols approaches with what might be genuine concern, asking about your plans now that you've survived the night. His question forces you to confront the reality that survival was only the first challenge. Now you must decide how to live with the knowledge of what Rome really is beneath its civilized facade. The city's awakening brings sounds that are simultaneously familiar and alien after your night of horror. The calls of merchants advertising their wares replace the screams and curses that provided the soundtrack to your nocturnal adventure. The clip-clop of horses and the rumble of cart wheels on cobblestones substitute for the running footsteps and clashing weapons that marked your journey through Rome's criminal underworld. The conversations of citizens conducting legitimate business drown out the whispered negotiations and threats that characterize the night economy. Roman urban planning becomes visible in daylight, revealing the logic behind what seemed like chaotic maze-making in darkness. The winding streets that confused and trapped you were designed to channel traffic flow, provide defensive advantages against invading armies, and maximize the use of limited urban space. The narrow passages that seemed designed to facilitate ambushes actually serve practical purposes related to construction costs, property boundaries, and the need to support multi-story buildings on inadequate foundations. The transformation of Rome's population is perhaps the most striking aspect of the city's daily rebirth. The criminals, prostitutes, and desperate individuals who dominated the nighttime streets have either disappeared entirely or blended seamlessly into the legitimate daytime population. The tavern keeper who served watered wine to dangerous customers now appears as a respectable businessman preparing for another day of commerce. The smugglers who used the Tiber for illegal transportation have been replaced by legitimate merchants conducting authorized trade. Your survival of the night has provided you with a unique perspective on Roman civilization that few visitors ever experience. You've seen the infrastructure of violence and exploitation that makes daytime prosperity possible, the criminal organizations that operate parallel to legitimate government, and the desperate individuals who fall through the cracks of imperial society. This knowledge changes everything about how you view the marble temples, the impressive architecture, and the confident citizens who populate the daylight city. The priests conducting morning rituals seem different now that you understand the political calculations that govern temple sanctuary. Their prayers and ceremonies carry the same spiritual weight, but you now recognize the practical considerations that influence their decisions about divine protection. The gods may be eternal, but their earthly representatives must navigate the same complex social and political pressures that affect every other aspect of Roman life. As the morning progresses and legitimate Roman society fully awakens, you begin to understand that your night of survival was both unique and routine. Unique because few people experience Rome's complete transformation from civilization to chaos and back again. Routine because this cycle repeats every single night, with thousands of Romans navigating the same dangers, making the same desperate choices, and learning the same harsh lessons about survival in the world's most powerful city. The knowledge that Rome's civilization is maintained through a delicate balance of violence, fear, and exploitation doesn't diminish the empire's achievements, but it provides context that makes those achievements more remarkable. Building aqueducts, conquering territories, and creating legal systems while simultaneously managing the chaos you've witnessed requires organizational skills that border on the miraculous. Roman civilization succeeds not despite its dark underbelly, but because it has learned to harness and control the very forces that could destroy it. Your reflection on the night's events is interrupted by the approach of a temple priest who informs you that your sanctuary period is ending, and you must make decisions about your future in Rome. The protection of the gods was never meant to be permanent, and the temple cannot indefinitely shelter everyone who seeks divine intervention in their human problems. You must choose whether to remain in Rome with your new understanding of its true nature, or to leave the city and carry with you the knowledge that civilization and chaos are often separated by nothing more than the rising and setting of the sun. The golden light of morning Rome spreads across the city like a benediction, blessing the marble and the mud, the sacred and the profane, the civilized and the savage with equal warmth. You have survived a night in ancient Rome, and in doing so, you have learned truths about human nature, urban life, and the price of civilization that will stay with you forever. The eternal city continues its eternal cycle, preparing for another night of transformation, another test of survival, another opportunity for desperate souls to discover what they're truly capable of when darkness falls and the veneer of civilization wears thin. As you prepare to leave the temple sanctuary and rejoin the world of daylight Rome, you carry with you the hard-won wisdom that survival isn't just about avoiding death. It's about understanding the systems, both official and unofficial, that govern human behavior when the normal rules no longer apply. The memories of your night in ancient Rome begin to soften as you settle deeper into the temple's protective embrace, the harsh edges of terror and desperation gradually giving way to a profound understanding of human resilience and the complex nature of civilization itself. The golden morning light filters through the marble columns, casting gentle shadows that seem to whisper of safety and sanctuary, a stark contrast to the menacing darkness that nearly claimed your life just hours before. Your breathing slows as you reflect on the extraordinary journey that brought you through Rome's labyrinthine streets, past its dangerous inhabitants, and into the heart of an empire that reveals its true nature only to those brave or foolish enough to witness its nocturnal transformation. The sounds of the awakening city fade into a gentle murmur, like distant waves lapping against a peaceful shore, carrying away the echoes of screams, clashing weapons, and desperate negotiations that provided the soundtrack to your survival. The warmth of the morning sun on your face feels like a benediction, a divine acknowledgement that you have passed through the crucible of Roman night and emerged with knowledge that few possess and fewer still survive to share. Your eyelids grow heavy as the tension of constant vigilance finally releases its grip on your body and mind, allowing exhaustion to claim what fear had kept at bay throughout the long, dangerous hours of darkness. The eternal city continues its ancient rhythm around you, but now you rest in the knowledge that you have seen Rome's true face and lived to tell the tale. The marble temples stand as silent guardians over your peaceful slumber, their shadows providing the safety that eluded you in the twisted alleyways and dangerous districts of the imperial capital. Your survival has earned you a place in the long history of those who have tested themselves against Rome's greatest challenges and discovered reserves of courage and cunning they never knew they possessed. Sleep comes gently now, carrying you away from the harsh realities of ancient urban survival and into dreams where the golden light of Roman morning extends forever, where the dangers of the night fade into distant memory, and where the knowledge you've gained becomes a source of quiet strength rather than terrifying awareness. The city that nearly destroyed you now cradles you in its ancient embrace, and you drift into peaceful rest knowing that you have truly survived a night in ancient Rome.